The mountain air bit sharply at Samuel's cheeks as he descended the rocky slope toward the valley. His cabin sat perched on the edge of the ridge like a sentinel, weather-beaten and unyielding to the storms that often rolled across the peaks. He had built it with his own hands years ago. Thick logs, stone chimney, heavy shutters, all designed for one purpose: to keep the world out. Samuel was a man molded by solitude. People in the town below whispered stories about him, calling him the Mountain Man, a figure half feared, half pitied. They said he'd once had a family, long ago, but no one really knew the truth. What they did know was this: he rarely came down from the mountain except for supplies, and when he did, his presence carried weight. Broad-shouldered, beard wild, ice cold as the river ice, he walked through town as though no one could touch him, and they didn't. But even men like Samuel had needs. He could split wood with one swing of an axe, hunt elk with bow and arrow, and track a bear across snow. Yet, when it came to food, he was hopeless. His meals were usually a charred piece of meat, or bread so tough it could break a tooth. He had grown weary of it. After another winter of chewing bitterness by the fire, he made a decision that surprised even himself. He'd pay someone to cook for him. Word spread in town quickly: the Mountain Man is offering coin. People whispered in the trading post. Some laughed, some shook their heads. Who'd want to climb up there and live with him? A shopkeeper muttered, better to starve. But the money was tempting, and for people who had little, it was no small thing. Still, no one volunteered. Samuel's reputation was too heavy, his silence too sharp. It might have remained that way, had Clara not walked onto the store one afternoon. Clara was not like the other women in town. She carried herself with a quiet dignity, though her eyes were shadowed with sorrow. She was young, perhaps 23, her dark hair tucked neatly under a worn shawl, but her belly told her story louder than words as she was heavy with child, alone, and without protection. Her husband had died in a logging accident that winter, leaving her with nothing but debts and pitying glances. Whispers followed her wherever she went, whispers not of kindness, but of judgment. A widow, pregnant, no father to the child. Clara ignored them, though each word cut like glass. What choice did she have? Her husband's family had turned cold, her own kin were far away, and the little she had saved was running dry. She needed work, and badly, so when she overheard the chatter about Samuel's offer, her heart stirred. He'll never take you. One woman sneered at her in the store. What would he want with a pregnant widow? Clara's chin lifted, though her cheeks burned. He wants someone who can cook, she replied. And I can. That night, she prayed by the dim light of a single candle. She prayed not for an easy road, as she knew life would not give her that, but for strength. The next morning, with her basket of ingredients strapped carefully on her arm, she began the long walk up the mountain. The trail was steep, the rocks slick with melting snow, and the wind tore at her shawl. But Clara pressed on. Each step was for her unborn child, each breath a reminder of the life within her that needed her to be brave. By the time she reached Samuel's cabin, her legs were trembling, her fingers numb. She knocked once on the heavy door, the sound echoing against the silent trees. The door swung open. Samuel stood there, filling the frame like a wall of stone. His eyes, sharp and gray, swept over here, first the basket, then her face, then the swell of her belly. He said nothing. For a moment, Clara wondered if he would slam the door, but instead, he stepped aside. Inside, the cabin was rough and spare. A fire smoldered in the hearth, the air thick with the smell of smoke and old wood. A table sat in the center, scarred and sturdy, piled with tools and half-burned candles. Everything had the mark of a man who lived for necessity, not comfort. Clara set her basket down, smoothed her shawl, and said softly, "I'll cook." Samuel grunted. His silence was heavy, but Clara was not the kind to be easily intimidated. She rolled up her sleeves, unpacked her basket, and got to work. She chopped onions, sliced carrots, seasoned the venison she had brought. Her movements were sure and steady, the kind of rhythm learned in childhood kitchens, passed down from mother to daughter. Samuel sat in the corner, sharpening a knife, his eyes occasionally lifting to watch her. The smell of cooking soon filled the cabin, rich, savory, alive. Samuel found himself sniffing the air, his stomach growling against his will. When Clara placed a steaming bowl before him, he eyed it with suspicion, as though it might bite, but the first spoonful stopped him. The flavor was warm, layered, real. For the first time in years, food didn't taste like survival, it tasted like life. Clara ate quietly across from him, her hands resting protectively on her belly. She didn't chatter or try to fill the silence. She simply was present, calm, steady. That unsettled Samuel more than anything. He was used to people fearing him, avoiding him, whispering behind his back. But this woman, fragile in body yet unshaken in spirit, treated him like a man and not a legend, not a monster. When she finished, Clara stood and began tidying the kitchen, humming a soft tune under her breath. The sound was gentle, lilting, like sunlight slipping through storm clouds. Samuel froze, the knife in his hand forgotten, as the melody stirred something deep within him, something he had long buried. He cleared his throat, rough and awkward. "You'll come again?" Clara looked at him, her eyes steady. "If you'll have me." Samuel only nodded, but in his chest, something shifted, something he hadn't felt in years. He had asked for a cook, but what had arrived was more than a woman with skill in the kitchen. It was someone who brought warmth into a place where only cold had reigned, someone who filled the silence not with noise, but with grace. As Clara gathered her shawl and prepared to leave, the storm outside grew heavier, snow beginning to fall in soft sheets. Samuel moved to the door, his large hand gripping the frame. For the briefest moment, he considered asking her to stay, but the words stuck in his throat. So he watched her go, the outline of her figure fading into the white. The cabin felt emptier than it ever had before, and Samuel, the mountain man, sat long into the night, staring at the fire, tasting the memory of warmth that lingered not just on his tongue, but in his soul. The weeks after Clara's first visit unfolded like a quiet miracle on the mountain. At first, Samuel expected she would never return, that the storm would have turned her back. But 3 days later, when the sun glimmered on the snow, he opened his door to find her again, a shawl pulled tight, basket of food at her side, cheeks flushed from the climb. She gave him the same calm smile, as if no storm, no mountain, no man's silence could dissuade her. From then on, she came regularly. Each time she entered, the cabin seemed to breathe differently, as if the logs themselves recognized her presence. Clara cooked with practiced ease, seasoning meat with herbs she foraged along the path, baking bread that filled the room with warmth, turning Samuel's plain supplies into meals that nourished both body and spirit. She moved with quiet efficiency, humming hymns or soft lullabies, the kind her child would one day hear. At first, Samuel kept his distance. He sat by the fire, sharpening tools, fletching arrows, or mending his gear, pretending he wasn't listening to her hum or watching the way she neatly folded his shirts after mending their seams. But slowly, something inside him began to soften. He found himself waiting by the window on the days she was due, scanning the tree line for her figure. He caught himself muttering less, listening more. The silence in his cabin no longer pressed on him like stony. It had company now, a gentler rhythm. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the ridges, Clara served a stew rich with venison and root vegetables. Samuel ate in silence, but when his bowl was empty, he cleared his throat. His voice was rough, uncertain, as if the words had long been buried. "You cook like a broken bar." He paused, unsure how to finish. "Like you've done this all your life." Clara smiled faintly. "My mother taught me before I could reach the table. She used to say food is love made visible." Samuel blinked at her, struck by the simple wisdom. Love. It was a word he hadn't dared think of in years. Later, as she tidied, he found himself asking questions. "Where did you live before? Do you have family nearby?" Questions that surprised even him. Clara answered honestly but gently, her voice never bitter. She told him about her husband, gone too soon in an accident that still haunted her nights. She told him about the loneliness that had settled on her shoulders like a weight too heavy to bear. But she didn't complain. She spoke with resilience, her words carrying not despair, but quiet strength. Samuel listened. For the first time in a long time, he listened not out of obligation, but out of need. And in listening, he began to see Claire differently, and not as a widow burdened with misfortune, but as a woman whose spirit was stronger than the mountains themselves. Winter tightened its grip. Snow fell thick and deep, turning the world into a white silence. Clara's visits became harder, the climb more dangerous. One evening, Samuel found himself waiting longer than usual, anxiety gnawing at him. He paced the cabin, scowling at the window as snowflakes swirled furiously outside. Finally, he spotted Hira, a small figure trudging through knee-deep snow, shawl pulled tight, basket dragging. Without thinking, he threw on his heavy coat, stomped into the storm, and reached her halfway down the trail. "You'll freeze," he barked, though his voice cracked with something more than irritation. Clara's lips curved into a tired smile. "I said I would come." He took her basket, slung an arm around her shoulders, and guided her up the path. By the time they reached the cabin, his hands were raw with cold, but he didn't care. Something deeper burned in his chest, something he couldn't name. That night, after she cooked, Clara sank into the chair by the fire, exhausted. She pressed a hand to her belly, wincing slightly. Samuel's eyes narrowed with worry. "You should rest. Don't come up again in weather like this." Her gaze lifted to his, steady and unafraid. "And what will you eat if I don't?" Samuel stared at her, speechless. All his life he had fought to prove his independence, his strength. But in that moment, he realized what he had never admitted: a strength meant nothing without connection. And Clara, with her quiet defiance, was teaching him that lesson better than anyone. As weeks passed, Samuel changed in ways he hardly noticed. He began clearing snow from the path before her arrival, mending a chair so she could sit more comfortably, even carving a small cradle out of pine wood, though he never told her why. When Clara laughed at something he said, an awkward attempt at humor he hadn't meant aloud, he found himself smiling too, a smile that reached his eyes. But the greatest change came on a night of storm. The wind howled like wolves, rattling the shutters. Clara clutched her belly, her face paled, her breaths quickening. Samuel's heart thudded in panic. He had fought storms, bears, even men with knives, but these others he could not fight with muscle or axe. "It's too soon," Clara whispered, sweat beading her forehead. "Boat to Broken Bar, the baby's coming." Samuel froze. For a long moment, fear paralyzed him. Then something ancient surged through him, not fear, but resolve. He knelt beside her, his large hand gripping hers, rough but steady. "You're not alone," he said, his voice low, certain. "I'll stay. I'll help." Through hours of pain and struggle, he kept the fire blazing, brought water, whispered words he didn't know he had inside him. His hand never left hers. His presence never wavered. And when at last the cry of new life filled the cabin, Samuel felt something break and mend within him all at once. Clara cradled her newborn, tears streaming down her face. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "You gave me shelter, Samuel. But more than that, a broken bar, you gave me dignity." Samuel, who had long believed himself too broken for tenderness, reached out with trembling hands. He touched the baby's tiny fingers, and for the first time in decades, tears blurred his vision. He bowed his head, not in defeat, but in awe. "You've given me more," he said hoarsely. "You've given me back my soul." Spring came slowly, melting the snow and coaxing green shoots from the earth. The valley buzzed with life again, but Samuel no longer felt the urge to retreat into silence. His cabin was no longer just his fortress, it was a home, filled with the sound of a woman's laughter, the cry of a child, and the hum of life. The townsfolk whispered when they saw Clara walking with Samuel in the valley, baby cradled against her. Some shook their heads, some smiled knowingly, but Samuel no longer cared what they thought. For the first time, he wasn't living for survival, he was living for something far greater. Clara hadn't just cooked for him, she had fed him with grace, patience, and quiet love. She had reminded him that even the hardest heart could thaw, that even a man of the mountain could be humbled by something as simply and as profound as kindness. And Samuel, once the feared mountain man, now carried in his arms not just the child of a widow, but the proof that grace could find anyone, even in the loneliest cabin high upon the ridge.